It's time. Oh, it's time. Hasan was on Piers Morgan yesterday, and now we're going to watch this. Here we go.
Well, now the battle of the hearts and minds, traditionally played out through diplomacy and propaganda, is being played out online. My next guest has almost 500 million views for his provocative commentary online, making him hugely influential. Hassan Piker streams live under the name HasanAbi. His analysis of the Israel-Hamas war has taken a highly critical stance towards Israel and Western media, and he's been calling me out for my coverage.
Because he only cares about Israeli citizens. He does not care about Palestinians as human beings. That's why it's apples to oranges. It's like one side is a human, the other side is a barbaric monster child.
I never said that, obviously. He says that he liked nothing more than...
Never said that, yeah. Probably didn't say that, no.
...to come on to Uncensored and call me a baboon in a suit to my face. Well, here I am, a baboon, and he can join me now. I'm joined by Hasan. Hasan, thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Oh, it's too bad they couldn't get him in the studio.
Thank you for having me, Piers. It's very early here in Los Angeles, California, but I'm going to try to do my very best to not do my
By early, he means it's 3 p.m.
British accent while I'm here.
Well, I appreciate that. And listen, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah,
Explain to me why you consider me a stenographer for the Israeli government, given that in the last week, I think more than any other host in the world, I have given lengthy platforms to pro-Palestinian voices to articulate that side of the argument.
I'll be honest. Piers Morgan has done that. And he's doing that right now with having Hasan on the show. He has.
No, I do have to commend you. You certainly have had more pro-Palestinian voices than the rest of the British media and certainly the rest of Western media in general. Now, as far as saying that you're a stenographer, I said that journalists are not supposed to be stenographers, and yet when it comes down to it, in most circumstances, in whatever conflict we may be in, there are stenographers for whichever party is aligning with the American State Department and the interests of the West in general. And Israel happens to be the one in this ongoing conflict.
Okay. But it's interesting that you call me a propagandist, because I want to play you. This was your reaction to when the hospital got
I'm
bombed.
a propagandist.
Well, no.
For the record.
I'm not calling
I'm a
you
propagandist.
that. I'm just saying. I'm going to play you.
I'm saying I am.
Okay. Well, then I want to.
I'm saying I am.
I just
before
want to
you
put
even play it.
Okay. I'm going to play the clip. This is your reaction to the bombing of the hospital the other night.
While I was in the process of getting ready for the stream, Israel enacted one of the singular worst strikes they have done thus far, and an airstrike in Israel.
I love how absolutely fucking pessimistic Hasan is about the conflict, that he doesn't even pause whenever he says that they have inflicted. He just adds "thus far" immediately on.
The airstrike hit the Al Ahli hospital in Gaza City, where thousands of civilians were seeking medical treatment and shelter from the relentless bombing campaign.
Now, interestingly, when you
Why are you laughing about people dying? Oh, that's exactly what I was laughing about. I want to let you know that's clearly what it was. Go make your Twitter thread right now. Go ahead. Before you do it, though, make sure to take your meds.
You were saying that, I was coming on air too, and I took a position based probably on 30 years of being a journalist, including running major newspapers, working at CNN and others, of waiting, of just saying, I think we should just wait and see what has actually happened here, get clarification, see who's actually to blame before we start passing judgment. You raced in to assume, as many people did, by the way, including the New York Times, BBC, mainstream media, and of course most of the Arab world then followed, that this was clearly, indisputably, an Israeli airstrike on this hospital. And yet all the evidence now suggests very strongly that it wasn't, that in fact this was a rocket that misfired coming from
I don't really agree with that. I think that Piers has often done this exact same thing with gun violence in America. Anytime that something bad happens with gun violence, Piers automatically goes and tries to create a narrative about how gun violence is bad. He does the exact same thing.
A terrorist group inside Gaza. So my question for you is this: Why would you
I wouldn't go that far.
Why
Piers.
would you be so certain in what you said before you knew?
Okay. So, first and foremost, before we get started on this conversation, let's understand something very important here. There's no electricity in Gaza. Internet is patchy in Gaza. There's no food in Gaza. There's no water in Gaza. This is all by design. This is because Gaza is under a brutal blockade, a brutal occupation by the Israeli government. Okay? So that plays a role in the fog of war and the misinformation that gets spread. Having said that, however, you made it seem as though there is a certainty that this was 100% not an Israeli airstrike.
No, I didn't.
And instead,
I literally just said it's not a certainty.
Okay, sorry.
I said the evidence is
Then
increasingly pointing to this not being an Israeli airstrike. And that is expert evidence from people who have no skin in the game at all.
Yes. Well, I don't know which expert you're talking about, because I think Channel 4 did a pretty good job. As a matter of fact, I would say Channel 4 did probably the best job so far in analyzing everything that the IDF has said. But the reason why I believed...
I'm going to be honest. I don't think you can know what really happens. I think that probably there's tons of misinformation. Like, I think everybody that's involved with that is misrepresenting it.
And I still do believe that the likelihood is that this was an Israeli bombing campaign, wasn't only because of the singular verifiable video, the phone video from the balcony that had all of the markings of an airstrike, the fact that the Israeli Air Force was enacting a bombing campaign in the region at the time, according to the Al Jazeera live streaming footage that everyone is using but doesn't understand, the fact that the digital media person for the IDF immediately came out and said that this was actually an airstrike that hit a Hamas target, and that he was sad that there were, casualties at the end of the day, but this was a Hamas target, and celebrated it. And more importantly, I guess, the fact that this hospital had been bombed by Israel. This hospital had been bombed by Israel on Saturday. 22 hospitals have, as a matter of fact, been bombed by Israel since this last saga in the occupation. And this hospital had been bombed directly by Israel, where the cancer ward was destroyed. Israel has been bombing all of these hospitals. Israel has been calling all of these hospitals to evacuate over and over and over.
Not true. It's very hard to say. I think that there's probably a case where it's not unreasonable or not outside of the question that there probably could be actual military things that are happening inside of the hospital. Sure. And they could use that as saying, well, they don't want to bomb us here because if they do that, then they look bad. Absolutely, that could happen. It's not the first time it's happened in history. It's happened many times before. How does he know this? And that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that Piers is right to criticize Hasan for immediately having a verdict on what he thinks happened without having enough information about it. I think it's very fair to say that's a problem. How do you know it was Hamas? I don't. Yeah, there's no way to know. That's what I'm saying, right? Is like my whole point is that I think it is such a gray area because it's hard. Like, what happened, but you don't really know entirely how it happened. There's a lot of people that are saying different things of how it happened. I don't think either Piers or Hasan would say that they know for a fact what happened. I don't know what happened. Who knows?
Again, the medical professionals at the hospital had been called by the Israeli government the day prior, and everyone on the ground assumes that this is an Israeli airstrike. They are the ones who experienced the situation.
Hassan,
so when you have every single, can I just finish this?
If you watch the BBC account of all this last night, by their Verify unit, which was specifically set up by the BBC to be completely dispassionate in these investigations. And they reached a pretty clear conclusion, based on circumstantial evidence, I'll make that clear, that this would not have been an Israeli airstrike, including, for example, the size of the crater, which bears no relation to the size of craters normally left by Israeli air. So, look, my point is, neither of us know for sure. But you took to your airwaves
Okay, so that's exactly what I said. Yeah.
Immediately, because actually I wouldn't even say unconscious bias, your admitted propagandist bias on your part was that you wanted that to be an Israeli airstrike. It suited your narrative. And I would say that in itself, in its way, is being a stenographer. Well, you accuse me of being a stenographer. I try and be fair and get to the truth. In your case, I don't think you try to do that. I think you appeal to your audience, appeal to your base, and you don't really care whether the facts are there or not.
I think this is true, and I think it's okay for Hasan to do that. And I think this is actually where a lot of the distrust in the media comes from, is that Piers is right in what he said. He's absolutely right about it. But what my concern with the mainstream media is, and people like Piers Morgan, is that they try to present themselves as being unbiased whenever they're actually also biased. Because I don't think that there's an issue whenever somebody like Alex Jones or Ben Shapiro or Hasan or Vosh or somebody like that, whenever they make comments, because everybody knows exactly where they're coming from. I think the problem is in the deceptive nature that mainstream media especially tries to present themselves as an unbiased, we're just reporting the news, but then the news is altered or intentionally represented or reported in a way to present one viewpoint, which I personally find to be much worse than what Hasan and Alex Jones do on two opposite ends of the spectrum. Because if you watch Alex Jones, you know what Alex Jones thinks. There's never I'm not really sure what, he's just trying to tell people the truth. Alex Jones has an agenda. Hasan has an agenda. And I think that in a lot of ways, it is better to say, hey guys, I have an agenda, and I'm going to present things in that agenda in a general sense. It doesn't mean that you should just spread propaganda. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I think that it's better, and this is one of the reasons why alternative media is more trusted now than mainstream media, isn't because that they're unbiased, it's because they're honest about being biased.
This is entirely unfair, because you just said circumstantial evidence favors that this was not an Israeli airstrike.
Yeah.
I gave you all of the circumstantial evidence that it does favor that this is an Israeli airstrike. The reason why, however, circumstantial evidence is not enough. And the one thing that I will concede to, because when more information did come out, and no, I do not mean when Israel said that they did not bomb this hospital and it was actually Hamas, and then they turned around and went, never mind, it's not Hamas, it's actually Islamic Jihad. And then they said, we have more evidence coming out in a couple hours. And then the evidence came out, and it turns out it sounded like the phone conversations that they were able to intercept, supposedly, sounded like, by experts at the very least, to be completely false and completely made up.
Yeah, but Hasan, I don't think, listen, in all honesty, I don't think, even as you're saying all this,
how can we possibly know what's real? Both sides are trying to present misinformation to make themselves look like victims to the rest of the world. You should just automatically assume everything that you see and hear is fake. You should just, start that it's fake. And this is the big problem that I think a lot of people have. You don't get tricked by the people who you disagree with. You get tricked by the people who you agree with. It's even more important to be skeptical about the things that confirm your biases, because those are the things that you want to be true.
I think you're a smart guy.
Piers, let me finish.
I think you've looked at all of this, and I think in your heart, you know this was probably not an Israeli airstrike. And I'm just curious why you would, instead of admitting that as facts change,
that is
your
not
opinion
what I'm
change.
saying. That is not what I'm saying at all.
If I was Hasan, I would shift to it was an Israeli attack. It might not have been an airstrike, because that's an argument that Piers can't really attack, and it's so ambiguous that it still maintains the moral superiority, but he can't actually narrow it down. That's what I would have said if I was Hasan. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to make sense.
I understand why you would double and treble down when the evidence is pointing the other way.
You're asking me to be on your show. Do you want to talk?
Yes.
If you're asking me to be on your show, and I want to be on the show, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's semantics.
Let me explain exactly what I said, and let me explain to you why I think still, to this very moment, until there is a third-party investigation that is concluded
it's not going to happen.
By the UN, the International Criminal Court, or specifically a forensic analyst that looks at the situation, is allowed to be on the ground. This is not just my perspective. This is B'Tselem as well, which is an Israeli organization that has also demanded a third-party investigation occur. I am not going to conclusively say that this was not Israel's fault.
I don't expect you to.
Because I just gave you, and not because I'm a propagandist. As far as me being a propagandist goes, everyone is a propagandist. I'm just honest about it. You're a propagandist. We have our biases.
I'm curious who you think I'm a propagandist for.
Honest about my biases.
Who do you think I'm a propagandist for?
Who do I think you're a propagandist for? every media person is doing propaganda.
This is actually a very good semantic trick Hasan or Piers Morgan used on Hasan. Because, like, what he did is he said, like, because Piers Morgan can be a propagandist for himself, right? He can just be like, I'm just putting my opinions out there because this is what I believe, right? But, like, instead of doing that, he made an appeal to, like, saying, well, who's controlling me? And Hasan can't really go past and, like, argue that and, like, make any sort of, like, correlation to that. Very, very good decision by Piers to say that. Yeah, I totally twisted what Hasan said. I think that it's one thing whenever you're arguing with somebody is like being able to frame the question and frame the conversation in a way that's beneficial is oftentimes the most important thing. Do you want to know an example of that? Whenever Imaru said that I don't read books on school, and I thought books were stupid, and then I said, okay, Imaru hates trees. You just completely reframe it in a framework that's beneficial to you. Never argue on somebody else's terms. Sounds like an argument between 5-year-olds. I've got something funny to tell you about presidential debates. Man.
But who for? I've got to be doing it with somebody.
You think it's a bad word. I don't. That's just the difference. This is a semantics conversation.
I think it's actually quite a serious charge.
Hasan,
I think it's a serious charge to level, not on a podcaster, but as a journalist who's broadcasting around the world, who has a reputation, I believe, for being fair and impartial, actually, on these issues. It's quite a charge to just say, I'm a stenographer for the Israeli government.
I don't think that Piers is fair or impartial. I don't. I think that Piers approaches issues with his own opinion. I think that examples of that are his interview with Alex Jones. I think another example is the way he framed Andrew Tate as being this crazy, misogynist, horrible person, which is probably kind of true. But whenever you saw the initial interview, he looked like this absolute fucking idiot, and you watch the entire longer one, and it's not that simple. You see what I'm saying? So I think that he absolutely has a bias. And also, like, for example, he brought on that like person about the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He's doing that because that's his bias. That's what he believes. I don't know why mainstream media anchors are so afraid to tell people that they believe something. And I think that's why a lot of people don't trust them.
Or I'm a propagandist. I don't think there's any evidence I'm either of those things. I'm curious who you think I'm doing
while
the
we're
propaganda
having this conversation, 3,000 Piers, while we're having this back and forth, 3,840 Palestinians have been ruthlessly slaughtered in the last incursion into Gaza. I feel like this is an incredibly selfish, self-centered conversation to have. You asked me to be on here. You wanted to hear my perspective. I'm willing to give it to you. I don't want to talk about I don't want to talk about Noam Chomsky style manufacturing consent conversations about how the media.
That was a good one. I was waiting to see how Piers responded, because Piers got him. Piers did kind of get Hasan, but Hasan was like, no, you're not going to get me. I don't want to talk about you getting me. Let's talk about something else. Yeah, it was actually like, yeah, Hasan played it off. He did it. Or at least Piers let it happen.
Is operating in the behest of capitalism.
You were the guy. Listen,
I think
you were the guy that called me.
There are dead people.
Listen, Hasan, I only asked you because you're the guy that called me a propagandist and called me a baboon in a suit. I was curious as to why. You don't want to say who I'm doing the propaganda for. We'll move on. I agree with you. There's a bigger picture here. Let's move on. Let's take a short break. Hasan, let's take a short break. I want to come back. I want to talk to you about what happened on October the 7th. Get your reaction to that.
Jesus Christ.
Welcome back. Hasan Piker is still with me. Hasan, I want to just play you a clip of something that you said about the October 7th terror attacks, and in particular, the attack at the music festival, which killed 260 people.
Look at this guy. You know what shouldn't happen? Killing 260 people at a music festival. No, you're right, man. That just happened on its own because, like, bad guys wanted to do bad things. You're right. Dude, if they subjugated you to a open-air prison your whole life, you're going to break out eventually when you realize that there's no other way to get out of it.
Yeah, I think he's totally wrong about that. I think it's very easy to like, so basically, like, what Hasan is saying is that it's understandable. And he's right that it's understandable, but it's not acceptable. So, like, of course you can understand why they do it, but it still doesn't make it okay that they did it. You can't justify it. It's just simply a reason. Neither is the prison. Yeah, but the people that are at the music festival didn't put them in the prison. Like, they didn't do that. Like, it would be one thing if you're attacking the people at the prison, but they didn't put them in the prison.
Sounds to me there, Hasan.
You justify Israel. And this is the problem, right? Is that everybody frames the conversation as who is right. I don't think that it's a case of who is right. There are a lot of wrongs, it seems, that both of them have done. This isn't a good versus evil. It's not that simple. You go and you kill civilians at a music festival, that's evil. There's no getting around this. There's no, oh, well, they were treated badly. I get that. And it's understandable why they acted out. But it is evil. There it is. And there's really no fine print to this. It's understandable and it's important to know how a person gets to the place that causes them to perform that action. It's the same way as, like, why does a school shooter shoot up a school? It's interesting to know why this happens. And it's important to know why it happens. But knowing why it happens doesn't mean that it's okay that it happened. Now, he says it's unacceptable all the time. He's just analyzing and saying some reasons why it happened. I know that. And Piers probably took the clip of him saying that it's that like why it happened. Like, Hasan, you have to keep in mind, right? Hasan is speaking extemporaneously on live stream for 8 hours a day. I'm sure that Hasan multiple times has said that it's bad to kill civilians, even whenever Palestine does it or Hamas does it.
That you are in some way saying they had it coming. Were you?
No, I wouldn't say that they had it coming. I think that Michael Brooks used to say, analysis is not justification. And while obviously civilian casualties...
I mean, there it is, right? He said alluded to the same thing. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have used the quote, but that works. Yeah, I called it. Yeah, exactly.
And horrific barbaric acts that were committed on October 7 are completely unacceptable. The important thing to make sure that
and
it never
happens. This is the same thing that they framed Hasan's argument for 9/11 for, by the way. Whenever he said that America deserved 9/11, he might have said that, but that wasn't really what his point was. He was saying that, like, you know, America meddling in the Middle East for like a long period of time is going to cause some sort of retaliation. This is reasonable. It's reasonable that this would have happened. You could expect that. Fuck around and find out. Of course.
Happens again is to analyze what are the conditions as to how...
Yeah, by the way, can we get an Ellen chat for 9/11? Yeah, it's not like I actually agree with it, you know?
It happened to begin with. And
it was a bad day.
I think Ehud Barak is going to be on in a little bit as well, or maybe he's on before me. Yeah. And I'm almost certain that while he has held the keys to the conversation and held the levers of the power in this conversation in many key and critical points, I would go so far as to say that he is among many others who also recognize that the Bibi Netanyahu administration is responsible. This is not just my assessment. This is 85% of the Israeli population's assessment at the time. This is years and years and years of refusing to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority. Don't take my word for it. Take Bibi Netanyahu's personal word for it.
I would agree again.
In a closed-door conversation with Likud members, he said that if you want to thwart any kind of Palestinian nation state, you must do everything you can to only negotiate with Hamas. We control how high the fire goes. He has given cash to Hamas by way of Qatar. There is no bigger fan of Hamas than Bibi Netanyahu, which I hope one day you can maybe interview, and then you'll ask him to.
No, I actually did interview him a few months ago, and I did actually spell out to him that there have been a lot more Palestinian deaths this year so far, up to the point of the interview, than Israelis, and what he intended to do about it. He said then he didn't believe in collective responsibility, which is now this hot phrase in this whole crisis about whether you would hold all people in Gaza responsible for Hamas. Interesting to see if when they...
Can I ask you a question?
Let me just finish my point. If they do then launch a ground invasion, it'd be interesting to see if they keep to that word. You know, I'm not a defender of what Bibi Netanyahu has been doing in Israel. In the last year, his attack on the credibility and integrity of the Supreme Court, I think, has been a disgrace. And I think it has fractured society in Israel. I also think that it's caused so much social unrest and had such big protests that you could argue has taken the eye off the ball of the people who should have been defending the border because they've been trying to sort out what's been going on domestically, internally inside Israel. So I think it's a catastrophic failure of intelligence, of security, of defense, all of those things. I'll be amazed, frankly, if Netanyahu survives this. So I'm certainly not here to defend him, even if you do view me as a stenographer for his government. My question for you, I think, is this, is that I've had a lot of problems trying to get people on the pro-Palestinian side to separate two things. That you can say, as I believe and you believe, that the Palestinians have been maltreated for decades. That the situation where they are effectively, I mean, I don't even call it an occupation because Israelis aren't in Gaza. They pulled out in 2005, but they still control the ability of Gazans.
This is why I call you a propagandist.
I'm just saying the phraseology is confusing to me because the reality is Israel exercises control over people in Gaza.
Don't they like control their utilities and shit? Like Israel isn't physically there, maybe. They don't have like a military presence, yet they control the utilities and everything. Yeah, so it's like they kind of are.
It allows them in and out. It allows them to turn on the tap of water and so on and so on. I get all that. They don't actually live there because they can't live side by side with each other.
That's why it's called an open-air prison.
Right. I don't disagree with...
That's why they call it the world's largest open-air prison.
Yeah, but Hasan, I don't disagree with you. And I've pointed this out for a long time as a journalist. So we don't disagree about the appalling plight of Palestinian people. But the issue comes that if you can't separate that ongoing dispute between Israel and Palestine from the absolutely appalling barbarism of October the 7th, which was on a whole different scale to anything we've seen, where 1,400 people, Holocaust survivors, babies in their cribs, young women taken, tortured, abused, shot, beheaded, it was reported, and so on. If we can't look at that collectively with a general humanity and agreement that is an absolute atrocity, then there's something wrong with this. And I find that the tribalism on both sides is now so...
Piers is right. He's right.
So toxic and so frenzied that you get people who literally can't. We've had a bunch of actors, right, signing this statement saying they want a ceasefire in Gaza and calling Israel war criminals and so on.
Why are actors signing something that they want a ceasefire in another country? What the fuck is going on? Why is this even happening? It's outrageous.
But they don't say a word about the Hamas attacks that precipitated this. And I find that really hard,
right?
Really hard to accept.
But do you agree with them? If they had said, for example, that October 7 attacks were brutal and massacres occurred, and then they said everything else, that Israel is committing war crimes, would you agree with them?
Okay, here's what I would honestly...
That's a good framing. Again, very, very true. Would you ban Hasan for that catch? Well, I think he's making a good point here. Hasan actually made a very good point, right? Is that, like, it doesn't really matter... Like, he's basically just saying the same thing back to him, right? He's saying, like, okay, well, if you can't talk about... Basically, what Piers Morgan is saying is, like, hey, why are you trying to make excuses for Hamas and, like, the actual terrorist and the bad behavior? And then Hasan is saying, well, why can't you just acknowledge that Israel has bad behavior as well? So I think that's pretty fair.
What do you say about that? Is Israel not allowed to defend itself from the worst terror attack we've seen since 9/11? Is it not allowed to defend itself
it's just odd.
after 1,400 people?
I think, like, if you want to talk about, like, defending itself, it's like Israel, like, should they do that or not? I mean, it depends on, like, who they're defending themselves from, right? A cancer ward in a hospital, probably not defending yourself from that. So, like, if they did bomb that, sounds like kind of a bad idea. I think it's complicated too because the odds are that there could be chances that the people that are doing, like they're actually like military people in Palestine, Hamas, they could be in a hospital. They could be in one of these places with civilians. They could be using the civilians as a shield. It absolutely could be happening too. It's extremely complicated. This is what I was saying before about how, like, this whole situation is not simple in any way. And it's not like, so then what does Israel do? Do they, and this is the thing, right? It's like, do you bomb the civilians that are being used as meat shields for the military? Or the terrorists that are terrorizing your country and killing your civilians? Do you do that? If you were in charge of a country and another country came and like killed a bunch of your civilians, and you want to retaliate against their military that did it, but their military is hiding in a place with other civilians, would you bomb them or not, knowing that it would kill civilians? The point that I'm making, I don't think that there really is a right answer to this. There is, you could say, a right ethical answer, right moral answer, whatever. But what I'm saying is that it is not a definitive answer. Half of the people are saying yes, half of the people are saying no. Is it 60-40, 70-30? What I'm saying is there's a lot of people on each side that disagree on it. People act like terrorists play fair. How can you fight terrorists hiding with civilians? I wouldn't go for them, but how to retaliate? That's the thing. Look at what the U.S. did in World War II. Do you think everybody in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were military? No, they were people. They were civilians. They just evaporated them. We did the same thing. You think everybody that we killed in Afghanistan and Iraq were all military? No. Killed civilians all the time. Yeah, Dresden. Look at Dresden. Yeah, we did this shit constantly. The way you frame it is unfair. Israel won civilians first. Hamas don't, while hiding behind those civilians. It doesn't really matter if Israel warns the civilians or not, because the civilians in Palestine don't have autonomy to move away from the Hamas or not. Because you have to understand that Hamas are fighting for Palestine, but they will... Dude, what do you think this... They're just going to let the civilians leave? No, they're using the civilians. They're not going to leave. They can't act on their own volition. So it actually is a pretty fair comparison. But they voted for Hamas. Fuck them. I think a lot of people probably didn't. And also, I don't know what Palestine's elections are like. Maybe they're not very fair. Why not do a ground operation then? Because it's more expensive than just shooting a bomb over there. It's pretty simple, right? It's cheaper to just go bomb them.
Israel are butchered in that way. And the question then, if you assume that they are able to defend themselves, as any free democratic country...
Yeah, but I think that's my only point, is that I do not believe that the Palestinian citizens that are being used by Hamas as potential meat shields, I don't think they're doing that of their own volition. I think they're being forced into doing that, and Hamas is doing that to them. It's not like they can say, hey, I want to leave. So, like, what I'm saying is they are not willing participants. Now, some of them I'm sure are. Absolutely some of them are. But not all of them. And I would assume majority of them are not.
Is the Israeli State Department line, that is the IDF's line, that is the line that everyone
Hassan, let me ask you this. It then becomes a question of how can they defend themselves? If their mission now is to get rid of Hamas, a terror organization that's committed one of the worst acts of terror ever seen, if that is their stated aim, then what they are doing is consistent with that, isn't it?
No. Here's why this is actually an abject failure, and this is not just my perspective on the matter. I'm just a dumb idiot with a Twitch stream who is live reacting to the news and trying to make sense of everything as it's ongoing. I usually have a policy of not covering breaking news, and sometimes that policy is violated, but ultimately I am not held up by the same...
I feel like, Hasan covers breaking news all the time. I think we all do. Like, I cover breaking news constantly. Fuck, of course you do. Because that's what people want to see.
Journalistic standards, even though I think I do a much better job than most other news outlets in general. So let me just say this really quickly. You said Israel has a right to defend itself. Absolutely zero people think that this is a ridiculous statement. However, how Israel is defending itself is collective punishment. Now, collective punishment in the form of depriving 2.2 million people of electricity, collective punishment in the form of depriving them of water, of food, collective punishment of in the form of 51 people dying in the West Bank, where, there is no Hamas in the West Bank, and yet 51 people have died because in the West Bank, settlers that are occupying Palestinian territory in violation of the international law, settlers who are doing an act of colonial terrorism, and this is not my statement on it, this is international law, that are doing horrifying things by simply just existing there and maintaining the presence with an occupying force in the form of IDF, who is ritualistically humiliating Palestinians in a structure that B'Tselem, an Israeli organization, calls the permit regime, where every waking moment of Palestinians' lives in the West Bank are absolute hell, where they have no legal recourse. 51 Palestinians have died, and that was before the Ramallah the Ramallah protest that happened last night, and the Israeli forces were opening up with live fire on protesters last night. So who knows what that death toll has become? This is all a product of Israel being an apartheid state. This is a violent apartheid state. There is no way to be a peaceful
Hassan,
apartheid
let me ask you
state.
this.
It is a violence. It is a violence required for its maintenance.
Okay, listen.
And that violence is frustrating people.
I hear
that
you.
That violence is radicalizing people.
But here's
Hold
my.
on.
I hear
as
you.
far as Israel, as far as what Benjamin Netanyahu has done, as far as the war government, what they have done, Piers, going into Gaza and bombing Gaza and killing 3,480 Palestinians so far in Gaza, 1,000 plus children out of all of those casualties, 22 hospitals being bombed, a bakery, the only remaining intact bakery being bombed yesterday. These are horrifying crimes that you would openly say are horrifying and unjustifiable when Russia does it, but when Israel does it,
whenever the U.S. does it, whenever any, like this is, I feel like this happens in every war. Like this happens every single time. I don't think it's really as clean and as, like it's not like, oh, only soldiers fighting soldiers. No, man. Like they kill civilians all the time. Yeah, it's a fucking war. Of course that's going to happen. It's bad every single time. I don't know why people are trying to play like, oh, well, it's more okay whenever they do it. This happened every for thousands of years. Yes. It's bad whenever any of them do it. Like, what is this? Jesus. You're right, but not to this extent. There are Geneva Conventions that are generally not broken by most countries in our alliance. Well, they're not broken, and these things don't happen unless people want to do them. Like, what happens if somebody breaks the convention? Then what?
Israel has a right to defend itself. This is identical to the same talking points that I've heard.
Let's watch China break one of those sanctions and then see what happens to them.
From every Israeli administration official. It's the same talking points that I've heard from American politicians championing the exact same talking points. It's the same thing that I've heard from everyone else in the media. You might have been against the Iraq war, and you use that, but you're using that for evil, in my opinion, at this point. If you are not sitting here and condemning those acts of war crimes, those acts of violence, those acts of collective punishment.
Well, I would say to that I think the death of any child in this conflict is horrific, absolutely horrific. But the question comes down to me that after an act of terror, as we saw on October the 7th, Israel should be able to defend itself and should be able to go after the people that perpetrated that, who live amongst civilians in Gaza deliberately. And the question...
Piers is right about this, but I think that he should be more specific. Like, he is right. Yes, that's true. They should be able to do it. And it also doesn't matter. Like, I don't know why everybody's talking about should. Like, what are we going to do? We're going to go stop them? They're going to go do it whether we want them to or not.
For me, becomes down to what is proportionate. I don't know the answer, Hassan. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that answer is.
I do know the answer to that. Last night I had...
I don't think that there is a good answer, because if there was, then people would have figured it out 2,000 years ago. Like, people have used civilians as shields forever. Nobody's ever figured out what to do about this. Like, I really don't think that there's like a clean-cut answer. Eye for an eye, we all go blind. Exactly. And that's why, but would you take somebody's eye out who didn't believe in that? And this is the situation. Is that, of course, people are going to take your eye out if they know you're not going to retaliate. But if they know you're willing to destroy everything, well, then you're going to wait a little bit. Oh, hold up. Let's not do this. It's like the whole mutually assured destruction from the Cold War.
Dr. Ofer Kassif, an Israeli Knesset member who was expelled, suspended for 45 days for saying what I believe is the truth. Championing the exact same position of the Haaretz's editorial board. There are a lot of thoughtful people, a lot of formative Holocaust scholars, a lot of historians that all agree on the same point. The reason why violence that even penetrates through the Israeli security blanket that people thought existed, that penetrated through that Iron Dome, the Iron Wall, if you want to call it that, is because of years and years of oppression and years of violence, which is a necessity to maintain an apartheid state. And this has to stop. There's only two ways out of this. Either you engage in full-blown ethnic cleansing, and if you listen to the likes of Smotrich, or if you listen to the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir and these very unfavorable, unpopular, far-right figures, if you listen to Netanyahu and his Likud government,
which I do think that there will be no resolution to this until one of them does not exist. They will never be able to live peacefully. It will never happen until one of them is totally wiped out. There's not going to be a peace treaty. They're not going to work it out. No.
They say that they are interested in going in that direction.
It's been like 3,000 years. Well, I mean, to be fair, Israel's kind of like a new thing. But, like, yes.
Direction, the ethnic cleansing direction, the ethnic displacement direction, or the only way out of this for a real solution is to move towards peace, to genuinely end the blockade, to end the apartheid, to end the occupation, and create a pathway towards citizenship for all people with a right to return, for all 14 million Palestinians, 5 million of which live under Israeli occupation. It's brutal. And then the rest living in diaspora. These are not unreasonable requests. These are requests that understand the dignity and the humanity of one side and does not simply treat them as their colonial subjects. And it's the...
I do think that it's a bit sus that Piers does not even try to even maybe consider the fact that it's like a bad thing to kill civilians at all. And I think this is kind of like, you know, Piers is talking about like just admitting that certain things are bad and like the extremism on both sides. I think that he's kind of playing into that a lot whenever he's like not even giving an inch of ground. He's like basically asking Hasan to, you know, would you at least concede this is bad, at least concede that is bad, at least concede this other thing is bad. Like, yes, sure. But like, this, I think the same thing you could say with bombing the Palestinians. Absolutely. Yeah, he's doing it, but he's basically just asking Hasan to concede without doing anything at all. Saying any of that. Sure, this conflict's happened thousands of years. Yeah, that's it.
Only way to create permanent security and prosperity in the region.
If it was as simple as that, I'm sure that would have happened already. I would say this. I agree with a lot of what you've just said. Not all of it, a lot of it. I don't think you can ever achieve peace now with Hamas controlling Gaza. I don't think you can achieve peace with Netanyahu in charge of Israel, actually, after this. I don't think his own people will want him to be in charge of Israel down below when they examine exactly how this happened. But we will see. But Hasan, I've got to leave it there. Look, it's good to talk to you. You know, you're an important, influential voice to a lot of people. And I think we have a lot of common ground, and there are some things that we disagree about. But I suspect it's not as much as you think. You know, I do think that the core problem here has got to get resolved in a way that's been completely ignored for decades. And until it gets resolved, until the plight of the Palestinian people is resolved, until all these young people in Palestine feel there's some sense of hope and they can get out of what effectively is, as you say, a prison camp, then...
And that's the thing, right, is like I noticed this with ISIS. A lot of the guys that are in ISIS, I've seen the pictures. They're like 20 years old. They're 25 years old. If they're 20 or 25 years old, the only thing that they remember is being controlled and having American troops in their country, occupying their country. And I guarantee you, I am a massive supporter of the military. I totally support the troops, 100%. My family's been in every fucking war since the Revolutionary War, and including the Revolutionary War. But yeah, I think that there probably was a lot of friction between the troops over there and the civilians over in Iraq and Afghanistan and these places. I just think that happened. Now, why do I think that happened? Because I think people are assholes. Yeah, that's really why. But why would there be friction? Because the whole situation exists because of friction. Yeah, that's the reason. Like, it exists because of friction. So, like, what I'm saying is, like, it's very easy for me to say, like, obviously ISIS is bad. ISIS clearly is bad. ISIS sucks. But I do think also a reason why those extremists exist is because they've grown up in a world that's completely controlled by a foreign power. Like, these two things can both be true. And I think it's the same thing for Hamas and Palestine. I bet a lot of everybody there grew up with this being the issue the whole time. Friction's a nice way to put it. The soldiers were oppressors. I'm trying to be a little bit diplomatic about it. How do Islam always create all the terrorists in the world? How do they have the least women's rights? Bro, I've never seen a religion with this much extremism. Do you know what Benjamin Franklin and George Washington would have been called if we lost the Revolutionary War? It's very easy for us to say that. Sure, the radicals are fucking terrorists. Absolutely. Fucking terrorists. You're the Crusades. Oh, yeah, there's bad stuff that happens, and sure, you know, there are cultural problems with everything. I don't understand Islam and the Middle East cultural problems. I don't get it. It's not my problem. I don't live there. I don't think it's just as simple as this religion produces this type of behavior. I don't think it's that simple.
Nothing is going to change. I don't think it justifies in any...
Let
me just say, I've got to finish it, but I don't think it justifies in any way what happened on October the 7th. But I do agree with you.
He's right.
And until that
Piers
core
is right.
problem gets resolved, there will never be peace. Hassan, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'll be honest. I think it's great that Piers Morgan has had Hasan on and a few other people that are very pro-Palestine on. And regardless of what Piers Morgan's views are or anything like that, I think it's great that he did that. Hasan did a pretty good job, too. Like, yeah, there were things maybe he shouldn't have said or things he could have said differently. But overall, I think he did a good job. He represented himself pretty well. And I think this is great. Yeah, Hasan played it pretty well. Yeah, he did. And I think that's impressive. Whenever Piers criticizes Hasan for being biased, the implication is that Piers is not biased. Now, Piers was able to shift this conversation to where, like, you know, implying that Hasan was a conspiracy theorist. But the truth is that Piers clearly has an agenda going into this. He clearly has a viewpoint going into this. And trying to hide that viewpoint and pretending like, oh, I don't really care about this. Oh, I'm just reporting the news. I think that's why people distrust him. Not him in particular, but mainstream media in general. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all of these networks, at least here in the U.S., are massively distrusted. And the reason why is because they try to appear unbiased. Hasan is not appearing unbiased. Hasan has a bias, he has a perspective, and he lets it be known. And it's a weird way where you can learn more truth from somebody who's willing to tell you that they have a bias. Because you can look at it in that context and you're not being misled into thinking that you're having an objective perspective. So yeah, I'm really glad that Piers Morgan did this. I think this is awesome. Huge W for Hasan getting on the show too. Like, that's fucking badass. I'll link you guys the video. It's right there.